And welcome to the Art Journey. Today we're going to be creating some terracotta pots with this art impression set, number 4869, small container set. And I'm going to show you how to create that reddish color of terracotta. So I've put 3 of the pots on this stamp. I like to put them all on a single stamp. That way I have an easier time getting them lined up in a straight line. I'm going to ink them up with Marvy number 45 Sepia. And then I'm going to stamp them off slightly off center on my card. Now with my number 4 watercolor brush, that's a number 4 round, this is a synthetic brush, I'm going to wet the brush, tap it off on my chamois, you can use a piece of paper towel, and carefully go in and pull the lines so that I pull that color to the inside, just to soften that line a bit. While I'm doing this, I'm trying not to put so much water on that any of the pigment bleeds to the outside of that line. I want to pull that color all to the inside. I'll do that on each one of the pots. You don't need to be very careful on this step, because we're going to be going back in and adding more color in order to get that terracotta look. There are a lot of different ways you can do containers with a lot of different pigments and markers. So certainly terracotta isn't the only choice. And notice that I'm not filling this in, and I'm leaving a lot of white area in the center of the pot, because that's what's going to create the roundness or the dimension. Now I'm taking number 6 brown. I'm going to put a swatch of this on my palette. This is the palette that comes with the kit with art impressions, or you can use a white ceramic or white plastic plate. The important thing is just to make sure that you put it on white so that the background color doesn't distort how you see the marker colors. Now I'm going to dip into that with the tip of my brush and carefully come over here and begin adding some of that color around the edges. Pulling that color in again from the sides, much the way I did with the sepia initially. Then I can dampen my brush just a little bit and begin pulling that edge over to soften it just a tiny bit. Remember, you can always go back in and add more pigment to darken the side, like this, but it's much more difficult to go in and lift color once you've gotten it dark. So I would go easy at first and then go back in later and add more if you want it to be slightly darker. Notice that I'm still leaving some light or some blotchy looking areas. That's the highlight that's caused by the light shining on one side of the pot. And that's how you make sure that you keep it looking round. If you lose the dimension and it begins to look flat, it's quite possible that that's because you don't have enough dark pigment. And you can go back in and always add that in order to bring up that roundness again. See how that changed that? Okay, now we're going to add some flowers and some foliage in the pots above. And I've picked out the flower set number 4052, and I'm going to use this lily style flower. And I've also picked out foliage set number 4, and I'm going to use this foliage and one of these tall spikes. I want to keep these fairly simple. So the way that I make sure to leave the pot intact and not get the foliage over the top is I use a sticky note with a sticky part, and I put it there so that the top of that pot just begins to show, so I see what the width is. And that will keep my greenery or my foliage from coming down over the top of the pot until I'm ready to do that. And I've decided for the color palette that I'm using to use a number 72 pine green. So I'm going to go in and add a little bit of color to that green. I'll move that over and mask the next one. And now over again onto the last one. I'm inking that up and then stamping it multiple times so that I get some dark foliage and some light foliage. And again, this helps to create some dimension. Now I'm going to add this flower with a stem. And just to make it stand out a little bit more, I'm going to use number 15 olive green on the stems and number 62 wisteria on the blossoms. Notice that I left a little bit of a white space up there above in that area for these blossoms to peek up and be a clump. Notice that I will often ink the flower in this particular color more often than I do the stems. That's because I really don't want the stems to have that many pronounced. Those in the back you wouldn't be able to see anyway. Okay, and then one more foliage style, and that's this tall, slender spike. And I'm going to put that one in a very dark African violet, because I want these to stand out. Now when I lifted that, notice that I got my stamp beyond the edge of the pot, because when I put that down, I wasn't careful to show the top side so that I would know where the pot ended. So I'm going to have to go in and fix that, and I'll show you how we do that in a minute. But let me finish this last purple. Okay, now to help cover up the side of that pot where I got some of these stems that aren't grounded in anything, I'm going to go ahead and cover my pot and go back to the foliage that I started with and ink that up with a little bit of the pine green. And now I can go over and just make this come out over the edge just a tiny bit. Now it looks like it's coming out over the edge and is supposed to be that way. When I soften the foliage, I generally do the green parts first. Sometimes I will even go ahead and finish these green part before I even stamp the flowers. But this is such a bundle that I decided it would be okay to go ahead and soften them all at once. Just a little bit to bring in some of this detail and softness. When this dries, I may have lost a little bit of the detail, and I can always go back in and stamp over the top. I can even do it now before it's entirely dry, just to get a little bit more of that leafy detail in there. And in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and let some of this green go over the edge of the pot. Now it looks like there's some soft green foliage in the back, and this detail will pull these slightly forward. So there we go. Now I'm going to go in and do these light wisteria color flowers first. They're almost pale and like they're in the back. And now last I'll go in and soften just a little bit of the purple. The effect that I'm trying to get is that these bouquets have depth. Some of the flowers are in the back, some of them are closer to the front. The things that are closer to the front are generally more detailed and brighter or darker in color. and the ones that are at the back will be more faded out. Now the last thing I want to do is ground my pots so that they're not floating. So I'm going to put just a touch of the sepia tone on my palette. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of this with a damp brush. And then I'm going to drag in a straight line along the bottom of these pots, just to give a little bit of a sense that they're sitting on something. A little bit of a shadow. Okay, now I'm ready for it to dry. I might add a sentiment, and then it's time to adhere it to a card front. Thank you. If you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to know when I do future videos.